Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what time of day you are viewing this recording. This is the guided reading recording number 3 for Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl, pages 76 to 121. Our reading focus today is on Anne's relationships with her mother, her father, Mr. Dussel, Anne's perception of the other people in the secret annex, and how nature plays a role in her emotions. Before we read, let's check out some vocab words. Ventilated. Ventilated means to discuss or examine an issue, opinion, complaint, etc. in public. Some synonyms are advertised, debated, discussed, or examined. The sentence this word appears in the book is Anne's usual list of failings has been brought out again and fully ventilated. Our next vocabulary word is torrent, meaning a rushing, violent, abundant, and unceasing stream of anything. Here is the example from the text. It went on, and finally it was such a torrent I could hardly keep pace with it. At one moment I thought, in a minute I'll give him such a smack in the face that he'll fly up to the ceiling with his lies. But the next moment I said to myself, keep calm. Such a fellow isn't worth getting all worked up about. Our next word, coquetry or coquettish. It means to be characteristically flirtatious, especially in a teasing, light-hearted manner. Some examples from the text. I suppose she thinks everyone is interested in what Mrs. Van Daan says. Coquettish smiles, behaving as if one knew everything. Here's another example. Mrs. Van Daan is a nice one. She sets a fine example. She certainly sets one, a bad one. She is well known as being very pushy, selfish, cunning, calculating, and is never content. I can also add vanity and coquetry to the list. Our last vocabulary word for today's guided reading is irrevocable. Notice how irrevocable has a prefix, ir. This prefix means not. The word revocable means capable of being canceled or taken back. When you combine the two together, irrevocable means unable to be taken back or final. Here's an example from the text. Always gives his opinions as the only one worth listening to, and once he has spoken, it is irrevocable. Before we read, let's do some thinking and predictions. Based on what you already know about Anne's personality, what do you think one of her favorite ways to spend the time in the secret annex is? What is something she loves to do? What helps her pass the time? Friday, April 2nd, 1943. Dearest Kitty, oh my, another item has been added to my list of sins. Last night I was lying in bed, waiting for Father to tuck me in and say my prayers with me, when Mother came into the room, sat on my bed, and asked very gently, Anne, Daddy isn't ready. How about if I listen to your prayers tonight? No, Mumsy, I replied. Mother got up, stood beside my bed for a moment, and then slowly walked toward the door. Suddenly she turned, her face contorted with pain, and said, I don't want to be angry with you. I can't make you love me. A few tears slid down her cheeks as she went out the door. I lay still, thinking about how mean it was of me to reject her so cruelly, but I also knew that I was incapable of answering her any other way. I can't be a hypocrite and pray with her when I don't feel like it. It just doesn't work that way. I felt sorry for Mother, very, very sorry, because for the first time in my life I noticed she wasn't indifferent to my coldness. I saw the sorrow in her face when she talked about not being able to make me love her. It's hard to tell the truth, and yet the truth is that she's the one who's rejected me. She's the one whose tactless comments and cruel jokes about matters I don't think are funny have been insensitive to any sign of love on her part. Just as my heart sinks every time I hear her harsh words, that's how her heart sank when she realized there was no more love between us. She cried half the night and didn't get any sleep. Father has avoided looking at me, and if his eyes do happen to cross mine, I can read his unspoken words. How can you be so unkind? How dare you make your mother so sad? Everyone expects me to apologize, but this is not something I can apologize for because I told the truth, and sooner or later, Mother was bound to find out anyway. I seem to be indifferent to Mother's tears and Father's glances, and I am, because both of them are now feeling what I've always felt. I can only feel sorry for Mother, who will have to figure out what her attitude should be all by herself. For my part, I will continue to remain silent and aloof, and I don't intend to shrink from the truth, because the longer it's postponed, the harder it will be for them to accept it when they do hear it. Some relationship drama. Anne does not get along with her mother. Has there ever been a relationship in your life that has been damaged by something someone said or did? How did you fix it? How could you fix it? Checkpoint number 1. Anne struggles with her relationship with her mother. What is the reason Anne gives for her lack of love for her mother? A. Anne's mother doesn't love her. B. Her mother makes cruel jokes and doesn't think her funny. Or C. Anne is too stressed by her living situation to love anyone. Sunday, June 13, 1943. Dearest Kitty, the poem Father composed for my birthday is too nice to keep to myself. Since Pim writes his verses only in German, Margot volunteered to translate it into Dutch. See for yourself whether Margot hasn't done herself proud. It begins with the usual summary of the year's events and then continues. As the youngest among us, but small no more, your life can be trying, for we have the chore of becoming your teachers a terrible bore. We've got experience, take it from me. We've done all this before, you see. We know the ropes, we know the same, since time immemorial, always the same. One's own shortcomings are nothing but fluff, but everyone else's are heavier stuff. Fault finding comes easy when this is our plight, but it's hard for your parents, try as they might, to treat you with fairness and kindness as well. Nitpicking's a habit that's hard to dispel. Then you're living with old folks, all you can do is put up with their nagging. It's hard, but it's true. The pill may be bitter, but down it must go, for it's meant to keep the peace, you know. The many months here have not been in vain, since wasting time knows against your brain. You read and study nearly all the day, determined to chase the boredom away. The more difficult question, much harder to bear, is what on earth do I have to wear? I've got no more pants, my clothes are too tight, my shirt is a loincloth, I'm really a sight. To put on my shoes, I must off my toes. Oh dear, I'm plagued with so many woes. Margot had trouble getting the part about food to rhyme, so I'm leaving it out. But aside from that, don't you think it's a good poem? For the rest, I've been thoroughly spoiled and have received a number of lovely presents, including a big book on my favorite subject, Greek and Roman mythology. Nor can I complain about the lack of candy. Everyone has dipped into their last reserves. As a Benjamin of the Annex, I got more than I deserve. Yours, Anne. Let's review Anne's relationships with her parents. Her mother, whose name is Edith. Anne claims that she doesn't have any love for her mother. We can see from the text that Anne shuts her mother out of her life. Why is this true? Anne finds her mother's jokes and comments cruel and hurtful. How about Anne's relationship with her father? Anne prefers her father over her mother, and Anne tries to act like her father because he is kind, fair, and honest. Here's your checkpoint question number 2. Anne looks up to her father because he is kind, honest, and puts others before himself. What other father have we read about that acts the same way? A. Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird. B. Bob Ewell from To Kill a Mockingbird. Or C. Mr. Bill Hutchinson from The Lottery.
Thursday, July 29, 1943. Dearest Kitty, Mrs. Van Dan Dussel and I were doing the dishes, and I was extremely quiet. This is very unusual for me, and they were sure to notice. So in order to avoid any questions, I quickly racked my brains for a neutral topic. I thought the book Henry from Across the Street might fit the bill, but I couldn't have been more wrong. If Mrs. Van Dan doesn't jump down my throat, Mr. Dussel does. It all boiled down to this. Mr. Dussel had recommended the book to Margot and me as an example of excellent writing. We thought it was anything but that. The little boy had been portrayed well, but as for the rest, the less said, the better. I mentioned something to that effect while we were doing the dishes, and Dussel launched into a veritable tirade. How can you possibly understand the psychology of a man? That of a child isn't so difficult, but you're far too young to read a book like that. Even a 20-year-old man would be unable to comprehend it. So why did he go out of his way to recommend it to Margot and me? Mrs. Van D and Dussel continued their harangue. You know way too much about things you're not supposed to. You've been brought up all wrong. Later on, when you're older, you won't be able to enjoy anything anymore. You'll say, oh, I read that 20 years ago in some book. You'd better hurry if you want to catch a husband or fall in love, since everything is bound to be a disappointment to you. You already know all there is to know in theory, but in practice, that's another story. Can you imagine how I felt? I astonished myself by calmly replying, you may think I haven't been raised properly, but many people would disagree. They apparently believe that good child rearing includes trying to pit me against my parents, since that's all they ever do. And not telling a girl my age about grown-up subjects is fine. We can all see what happens when people are raised that way. At that moment, I could have slapped them both for poking fun at me. I was beside myself with rage, and I only knew how much longer we had to put up with each other's company. I'd start counting the days. Mrs. Van Dan's a fine one to talk. She sets an example all right, a bad one. She's known to be exceedingly pushy, egotistical, cunning, calculating, and perpetually dissatisfied. And to that, vanity and coquettishness, and there's no question about it. She's a thoroughly despicable person. I could write an entire book about Madame Van Dan, and who knows, maybe someday I will. Anyone can put on a charming exterior when they want to. Mrs. Van D is friendly to strangers, especially men, so it's easy to make a mistake when you first get to know her. Mother thinks that Mrs. Van D is too stupid for words, Margot that she's too unimportant, Pim that she's too ugly, literally and figuratively. And after long observation, I'm never prejudiced at the beginning. I've come to the conclusion that she's all three of the above and lots more besides. She has so many bad traits. Why should I single out just one of them? Yours, Anne. P.S. Will the reader please take into consideration that this story was written before the writer's fury had cooled? Checkpoint 3. In which sentence does Anne show that even she believes she may be overreacting about Mrs. Van D? A. I quickly racked my brain for a neutral topic. B. Mrs. Van Dan's a fine one to talk. C. P.S. Will the reader please take into consideration that this story was written before the writer's fury had cooled? Please pause the recording and answer the checkpoint now. Thursday, September 16, 1943. Dearest Kitty, relationships here in the annex are getting worse all the time. We don't dare open our mouths at mealtime, except to slip in a bite of food, because no matter what we say, someone is bound to resent it or take it the wrong way. Mr. Boskool occasionally comes to visit us. Unfortunately, he's not doing very well. He isn't making it any easier for his family because his attitude seems to be, what do I care? I'm going to die anyway. When I think how touchy everyone is here, I can just imagine what it must be like at the Boskools. I've been taking valerian every day to fight the anxiety and depression, but it doesn't help me from being even more miserable the next day. A good hearty laugh would help me more than 10 valerian drops, but we've almost forgotten how to laugh. Sometimes I'm afraid my face is going to sag with all the sorrow and that my mouth is going to permanently droop at the corners. The others aren't doing any better. Everyone here is dreading the great terror known as winter. Another fact that doesn't exactly brighten up our days is that Mr. Van Maren, the man who works in the warehouse, is getting suspicious about the annex. A person with any brains must have noticed by now that Meep sometimes says she's going to the lab, Bep to the file room, and Mr. Kleiman to the OPEC to supplies, while Mr. Kugler claims that annex doesn't belong to this building at all, but to the one next door. We wouldn't care what Mr. Van Maren thought of the situation, except that he's known to be unreliable and to possess a high degree of curiosity. He's not one who can be put off with a flimsy excuse. One day, Mr. Kugler wanted to be extra cautious, so at 20 past 12, he put on his coat and went to the drugstore around the corner. Less than 5 minutes later, he was back, and he sneaked up the stairs like a thief to visit us. At 1:15, he started to leave, but Bep met him on the landing and warned him that Van Maren was in the office. Mr. Kugler did an about-face and stayed with us until 1:30. Then he took off his shoes and went in his stockinged feet, despite his cold, to the front attic and down the other stairway, taking one step at a time to avoid the creaks. It took him 15 minutes to negotiate the stairs, but he wound up safely in the office after having entered from the outside. In the meantime, Bep had gotten rid of Van Maren and come to get Mr. Kugler from the annex, but he'd already left, and at that moment he was still tiptoeing down the stairs. What must the passerby have thought when they saw the manager putting on his shoes outside? "Hey, you there in the socks!" Yours, Anne. Stop and think. Anne is taking anxiety pills to help her cope with the stress of living in the secret annex. They have to take every precaution against getting noticed, which means being extremely cautious in case someone gets suspicious about the annex. Have you ever had a situation in your life where you had to be extremely careful? How did it make you feel? Checkpoint 4. Why do you think relationships in the annex are getting worse all the time? Is it A, too many people living in close quarters with no break from each other? Is it B, the fear of being discovered? Or is it C, different personalities trying to live together? Please pause the recording and answer the checkpoint now. Anne uses weather and nature to describe moods within the annex. As you are reading, pause the slides and highlight where you see her use weather or nature as a description. Monday evening, November 8, 1943. Dearest Kitty, if you were to read all my letters in one sitting, you'd be struck by the fact that they were written in a variety of moods. It annoys me to be so dependent on the moods here in the annex, but I'm not the only one. We're all subject to them. If I'm engrossed in a book, I have to rearrange my thoughts before I can mingle with other people, because otherwise they might think I was strange. As you can see, I'm currently in the middle of a depression. I couldn't really tell you what set it off, but I think it stems from my cowardice, which confronts me at every turn. This evening, when Bep was still here, the doorbell rang long and loud. I instantly turned white, my stomach churned, and my heart beat wildly. And all because I was afraid. At night in bed, I see myself alone in a dungeon without father and mother. Or I'm roaming the streets, or the annex is on fire, or they come in the middle of the night to take us away and I crawl under my bed in desperation. I see everything as if it were actually taking place, and to think it all might happen soon. Maeve often says she envies us because we have such peace and quiet here. That may be true, but she's obviously not thinking about our fear. I simply can't imagine the world will ever be normal again for us. I do talk about after the war, but it's as if I were talking about a castle in the air, something that can never come true. I see the 8 of us in the annex as if we were a patch of blue sky surrounded by menacing black clouds. The perfectly round spot on which we're standing is still safe. But the clouds are moving in on us, and the ring between us and the approaching danger is being pulled tighter and tighter. We're surrounded by darkness and danger, and in our desperate search for a way out, we keep bumping into each other. We look at the fighting down below and the peace and beauty up above. In the meantime, we've been cut off by the dark mass of clouds so that we can go neither up nor down. It looms before us like an impenetrable wall trying to crush us, but not yet able to. I can only cry out and implore, "Oh, ring, ring, open wide and let us out." Yours, Anne. Checkpoint 5. Anne states, I see the 8 of us in the annex as if we were a patch of blue sky surrounded by menacing black clouds. What do you think the black clouds represent? A, the relationships in the house. B, the danger surrounding them getting closer. Or C, her home where she used to live. Please pause the recording and answer the checkpoint now.